Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back, to the land between the rivers, where the sun beats down like a judgmental spotlight and the roads are more mud than road. We're heading to ancient Sumer, around 3000 BCE, where humanity's first cities bloom from dust, and civilization is just figuring out what to do with all these clay tablets and surplus grain. Picture this, you're trudging along dusty canal path lined with reeds, the air thick with the scent of mud, wet straw, and something fermenting. Not unpleasant, but let's just say it has character. In the distance, the ziggurat of looms like a giant layer cake made of sun-baked bricks. You're not here to worship the gods, though. Not yet. You're here for something nobler, a coldish cup of beer. Yes, beer, not the crisp, hoppy kind you'd order from a Brooklyn taproom, but the Sumerian version, which is more like a bubbly porridge and might have a few floating grains for texture. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly cold. But it's the drink of the people, brewed in backyards, temples, and taverns, and whispered about in love songs and tax records. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I love seeing our sleepy little map light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just after dawn. The light pours golden and dusty through the haze. Farmers haul baskets of barley from the fields, some chewing lazily on sprigs of grain. The Sumerians, clever, tired geniuses that they are, have turned this humble barley into a cornerstone of their culture. Food, of course, but also drink. Beer was more than a beverage. It was a staple, a status symbol, a divine offering, and in a few special cases, a slightly chilled miracle. Now, beer in Sumer is a bit chunky. That's not a joke. It's not filtered. It's cloudy, nutritious, and sometimes it bubbles like it's thinking about you. You learn quickly that Sumerians didn't sip beer. They slurped it through long reed straws that reached deep into communal jugs, avoiding the grainy sediment at the bottom. And sharing was key. Drinking alone was seen as odd. Why drink coldish grain broth by yourself when you could bond over it with your neighbor and maybe solve a political dispute while you're at it? The city smells of dust, livestock, and yeast. You pass one of the thousands of open-air courtyards where women in linen skirts stir massive clay pots over wood embers. The brew fizzes lazily, guarded by cats and curious toddlers. Dogs bark lazily at passing carts. The beer here isn't brewed for pleasure, it's brewed for life. It's full of calories, vitamins, and whatever microbes were having a party that week. Now here's a cheeky truth. Beer might have been the real reason the Sumerians invented writing. Historians still argue whether the earliest tablets were used more for recording epic poems or for tracking who owed beer to whom. Spoiler, beer wins. You glimpse a scribe scratching neat cuneiform into a tablet, recording a shipment of barley, or perhaps a warning that the beer vat behind Temple Gate 3 has turned. Again. But it wasn't all warm bowls and dry numbers. Some brewers got clever. They noticed that when pots were kept in shaded spots, near the damp mud walls of the city, the beer tasted better, cooler, smoother, even refreshing on a particularly sweaty day. The trick, you'll soon learn, involved a fascinating bit of accidental science. But we're not there yet. You duck into the shade of a brewery wall where a small boy fans embers under a drying rack. Clay jars lie in rows, their bellies puffed with half-fermented barley mash. You watch a brewer, probably a priestess given the gleaming medallion around her neck, stir a batch while chanting a hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. The words are soft, rhythmic. It feels less like work and more like spellcasting. The beer swirls obediently. You're offered a cup, a small, unglazed clay bowl. It's warm. It smells like sourdough and river moss. But when you sip, there's a sweetness, a grainy comfort. It goes down easier than you expected. A second sip, and your shoulders drop. You've joined the oldest happy hour in history. As you settle onto a reed mat, feet dusted and mind humming, you notice something odd. One of the clay jars is sweating. Not figuratively, It's actually beating with moisture. You touch it. It's cooler than the air, almost cool to the touch. Aha, someone's figured something out. But we'll explore that secret in due time. For now, enjoy the scene, the lazy stirrings of morning commerce, the murmur of water wheels turning somewhere downstream, and the faint song of a temple chorus floating on the wind like half-remembered dreams. Because in Sumer, even beer has a bedtime story. You're back on your feet now, shadowing a man with arms full of barley as he makes his way from the sun-drenched fields to the edge of the city. The path is uneven, dust clinging to your ankles like a lazy cat. Every few steps, the man adjusts his grip, and the dry, golden grains shift with a soft, whispering rustle, like wind passing through dry reeds. This barley is the lifeblood of Sumerian beer, and you're about to learn just how it becomes a beverage worthy of a goddess. Once inside the bustling city perimeter, you find yourself in the heart of a small brewing district. It's not exactly scenic, more of a glorified mud lot surrounded by low brick buildings, but it's alive. Women knead barley dough, flattening it into large round cakes before placing them out to dry in the sun. These are bapir, the twice-baked bread used as the base of Sumerian beer. Not meant to be eaten, really. They're like edible yeast bombs, waiting to dissolve into a mash of magic. And here's your mainstream fact for the day. The brewing process began with those loaves. Crumbled into water and left to sit, they'd soften and ferment, thanks to wild yeast that loved nothing more than a warm, sticky soup of sugars. Historians still argue whether Sumerians truly understood fermentation, or whether they simply noticed that leaving soggy bread around made people happy in weird ways. You're handed a warm piece of bapir. You sniff it. It smells like sour cereal. When you nibble the edge, it crumbles like old chalk. Not delicious, but it gets the job done. And anyway, the goal here isn't taste, it's transformation. The brewmasters, or brewmistresses more often than not, pile bapir into large clay vats, pouring water in slowly, sometimes humming as they stir. The mixture bubbles gently. Nearby, someone adds a touch of date syrup, their fingers sticky and sweet. It's a nod to Sumerian taste preferences. They like their beer just a little fruity. You glance around and notice the vats come in different shapes. Some are narrow, tall like a yoga mat rolled into ceramic. Others are wide and squat, rimmed with little nicks to tie lids in place. One vat has decorative patterns, swirls like river eddies, and what might be stylized hops. Or maybe lizards. Interpretive art apparently was a thing. As you walk between stations, you catch sight of a bucket of herbs. The brewer catches your curious look. Flavor, she says, pointing at the bundle. And bugs don't like it. Smart. No hops in Sumerian beer. Those came much later. But Sumerians did use herbs and other plants to flavor and preserve their brew. The air grows thicker as the day heats up. You find shade under a woven awning and sip water from a palm leaf cup. The fermentation process here is surprisingly fast. Within hours, that grainy swamp mash starts to shift. Sour, yeasty smells rise from the vats, and tiny bubbles begin to form along the rim. Sumerians knew it was working when it breathed. The beer hissed, gurgled, or let out a satisfying belch. There's no pasteurization, of course, no sanitation like today. But the alcohol content, low as it was, helped keep things safe enough. You probably won't die from it, unless you're allergic to dust, cats, or existential crises. And even then, you go out slightly buzzed. One brewer offers a peek into a side room. Inside, loaves of bapir dry in rows like little bricks, each marked with a stamped symbol. One shows a crescent moon, probably temple property. Another has a zigzag, maybe a brewery logo, branding Sumer style. You move outside again, the sun higher now, bouncing off clay and brick like a slow oven. The barley fields far in the distance shimmer with heat. You wonder how people made it through midday without melting. Here's where it gets quirky. You hear two brewers arguing softly over how long the mash should rest. One insists on 2 days. The other swears her mother left it for 5 and lived to 94. Historians still argue whether long fermenting yielded better beer or just funkier hallucinations. Meanwhile, the barley mash starts to take on a richer smell. Tangy. Alive. The clay jars sweat under the heat, moisture gathering on their surfaces thanks to that porous material and the magic of evaporation. You run your hand along one and find it surprisingly cool. Not icy, but definitely fresher than the air around you. The brewer notices. She smiles, tapping the pot gently. Shadu, she says. Cool jar. The trick? Unsealed porous clay. When moisture seeps through the walls and evaporates, it pulls heat from the inside. Ancient air conditioning in a jar. That's your fringe fact for this section. The Sumerians might have stumbled upon evaporative cooling by accident, but they used it with finesse. Some even painted jars with mud or wrapped them in wet cloth to enhance the effect. It wasn't freezing, but on a 42-degree afternoon, a few degrees cooler made a world of difference. You linger beside the jars, the cool air wisping off them like a sirti. A breeze moves through the alleyway, lifting the scent of grain and damp clay. The brewer hands you a fresh cup. This time, the beer is cooler, barely, but enough to notice. It still tastes like carbonated porridge, but smoother. Less like breakfast and more like history. And just as you're wondering whether this beer will keep fermenting in your stomach, a goat wanders into the brewing yard. It licks an empty pot. No one stops it. You realize here in Sumer, everything is part of the process, even curious goats. You follow the goat for a moment. It seems to know where it's going, and end up in the shadow of a tall brick temple that smells of incense and barley mash. This is no regular brewery. This is a holy place, dedicated to Ninkasi, goddess of beer, fermentation, and mildly chaotic joy. If a pint glass had a patron deity, it'd be her. You pass under an arch of hanging reeds, stepping into a courtyard alive with song and steam. The brewmasters here aren't your average home brewers. They're priestesses, draped in linen and gold thread sashes, each bearing the sacred emblem of the brewing goddess, a cluster of barley stalks crossed with a stirring stick. The courtyard is bustling. Large clay vats bubble like lazy volcanoes, and women move through the space with rhythmic ease. You can hear them softly chanting the hymn to Ninkasi, one of the oldest recorded recipes in the world. It's part poem, part brewing manual, and part low-key party anthem. The melody is repetitive but oddly soothing, perfect background music for fermentation and sleep. This hymn is your mainstream historical fact. It's inscribed on a clay tablet in Sumerian cuneiform, one of the earliest examples of written text being used not just for kings and taxes, but for everyday life. The hymn walks through the entire process: barley malting, dough baking, fermentation, and pouring, giving us a glimpse into how important beer was not just economically, but spiritually. The priestesses stir slowly, counterclockwise always. One explains, half smiling, half serious, that the direction keeps evil spirits from nesting in the froth. Another adds a sprig of mint to a vat and drops in a chunk of date cake, sweetness and spice. You can almost imagine the Sumerian equivalent of a seasonal brew, the late flood lager or harvest solstice stout. One of the women shows you with a special kind of jar, taller, narrower, with a small notch near the base. For offerings, as she says, the best beer, coldest one too. You run your fingers along it and feel the faint chill. The jar is designed to breathe, its narrow shape minimizing heat gain. It's also kept in the temple's inner sanctum, shaded by thick walls and draped in soaked linen. Even in summer, the beer inside remains tolerably cool. A miracle? No. Just Sumerian engineering meets divine PR. As the morning stretches on, the priestesses begin ladling the fresh beer into smaller pots, each marked for a specific purpose, some for ceremonies, some for temple guests, and some for barter. Yes, you heard right. Temples acted like banks. They issued beer, collected taxes and grain, and even loaned out workers. Basically, they were the divine microbreweries of the ancient world. You catch snippets of conversation. One priestess complains about a rival temple watering down their offerings. Another sighs about a shipment of spoiled dates. One admits she drank a little too much of yesterday's batch and forgot to chant the last verse of the hymn. The others laugh good-naturedly. It seems even divine brewmasters need coffee or beer on rough mornings. Your quirky tidbit? Some scholars believe the priestesses would sample each batch before serving it, to test its quality, yes, but also to spiritually connect with the brew. One translation even hints at mild intoxication being part of the religious experience, a sacred buzz, if you will. You move to a side alcove where a large clay relief depicts Ninkasi holding a ladle, flanked by two lions. Fierce but domestic. She's smiling as if to say, yes, this batch is ready. Also, you forgot to clean your stirring stick. There's an inscription beneath her feet, and while you can't read Sumerian cuneiform, it's probably a reminder that moldy vats displease the gods. Around the corner, young apprentices are scrubbing fermenting pots with bundles of reeds and ash. The air is pungent, smoky and sweet. One girl, not more than 12, laughs as she splashes her foot in a puddle of half-fermented sludge. "Tomorrow's brew," she says with mock horror. Everyone chuckles. You do too, but only after checking your own sandals. Historians still debate just how centralized temple brewing was. Some argue that the best beer came from these divine kitchens, while others suggest that most beer was still homemade, with temples only stepping in for festivals, rituals, or royal visitors. Either way, what's clear is that these women were masters of their craft, and the first documented brewmasters in history. By now, your nose has adjusted to the aromas, malted grain, date syrup, river clay, and it's almost calming, a kind of olfactory lullaby. You find a shady spot beneath a woven mat roof and sit, watching the slow dance of the brewing process. You hear laughter, the clink of pottery, and the soft slosh of stirred beer. One priestess brings you a fresh cup. She holds it like a gift. You accept, sip, and this time, the beer is actually cool. Not cold, mind you, but cool enough to surprise your tongue. The evaporation jars in the shaded alcove did their job. You nod in appreciation. She winks and walks away, humming the hymn again, her voice fading into the temple's rhythm. You stay seated, eyes half closed, as the sun filters through damp reeds above. A soft breeze rolls in. Someone begins sweeping the courtyard with a bundle of palm leaves. Another brews incense in a cracked stone bowl. And you? You just sip your ancient beer, feeling the warmth in your chest and the coolness in your cup, two opposing sensations that somehow belong together. The goddess smiles down from her mural. You've earned her approval. You're leaning against a mud brick wall now, cup empty, eyelids heavier than before. But something draws you up. Something about that jar. That cool jar. Not cool in the nice design sense, but cool to the touch in a land where the sun seems to hang 6 feet off the ground. The brewer who handed it to you earlier gestures for you to follow. She speaks few words, but her hands communicate plenty. You pass through a narrow hallway, past baskets of dried herbs and a pile of half-burnt reed stalks, into a chamber half sunk into the earth. The air inside hits different, denser, quieter, and yes, definitely cooler. This is one of Sumer's best-kept brewing secrets, the clay chill room. It's nothing like a modern fridge, but it works. Here, thick clay jars sit nestled in sand. The walls are layered with mud, dredge, and crushed shell, designed to insulate the space. Chunks of moist linen hang over the opening like heavy curtains. As the linen dries, it pulls heat from the air, creating a slight but constant breeze that brushes across the jars. And the jars themselves, ah yes, are masterpieces. This is where the mainstream historical fact kicks in. Sumerians developed porous ceramic vessels that allowed moisture to seep through the walls and evaporate. That evaporation carried away heat from the interior, cooling the contents just enough to make a difference. No ice, no magic, just physics and patience. You kneel by a jar, press your palm to its side. The surface is damp, slightly gritty. The jar hums with quiet purpose. No refrigeration hum, of course, but there's a stillness here that suggests something sacred is happening, or at least something clever. The brewer places a damp cloth on your neck. She smiles. Hot head, cold beer. You try not to giggle, it is a bit funny, but you nod, grateful. Because here in the middle of a desert civilization, they've beaten the heat with clay and condensation. It's a minor miracle, or major stubbornness. But that's not the only method. You soon discover there's a whole toolkit of low-tech cooling strategies. One involves storing beer in tall jars half buried in shaded courtyards, often surrounded by damp reeds. Another uses wide, shallow bowls of water with beer pots placed inside them. A primitive water bath. If the breeze cooperates, the evaporation does the rest. Now here's your quirky bit. Some Sumerian brewers claimed that beer cooled near riverbanks tasted better, not just because of temperature, but because the river spirits blessed it. A superstition, sure, but it led to riverside beer huts becoming social hubs. Some even hosted poetry contests, half-slurred, fully passionate. You pass one such hut on your walk later that afternoon. The wooden sign, scorched with the image of barley sheaves, swings in the wind. Inside, you find several men crouched around a wide pot, slurping beer through long reed straws. One nods for you to join. You do. The beer is better than before. Cooler. Still cloudy, still earthy, but with a crispness that could almost pass as refreshing if you squint your expectations. It's not beer as you know it, but it's beer as they knew it. And honestly, it's growing on you. You look around, the hut is built from woven reeds, mud plaster, and optimism. Cracks in the walls let in light, but not heat. The floor is packed earth, with clay tiles arranged in a simple mosaic. One depicts a goat stealing a beer pot. A joke? A warning? Maybe both. Someone in the hut mutters about a wind jar. Curious, you inquire. They point to a vessel hung high near the ceiling, its wide mouth tilted toward the prevailing breeze. As wind moves through, it pulls moisture from a soaked cloth wrapped around the jar, enhancing the cooling effect. Passive airflow meets passive cooling. Historians still argue whether these wind jars were common or exceptional. Some think they were temple tech only, others suggest every decent brewer had one. Either way, you're convinced now, these people didn't just stumble into cool beer. They engineered it. The sun begins to dip. A golden light slants through the hut, catching the curve of a pot and throwing its shadow long across the wall. You feel that sleepy contentment that comes with a full belly, a satisfied brain, and slightly fermented blood. One of the drinkers beside you gestures with his straw, pointing to the jar. "Best batch," he says, slurring slightly. "Kept it cool 2 days." You raise your brow, impressed. That's more than survival. That's craftsmanship. Outside, the city is settling down. Smoke curls from roof vents. Children chase each other with palm leaves. Dogs bark half-heartedly at pigeons. The scent of bread mixes with the last breath of sunlight. You stroll toward your temporary lodging, the clay streets warm underfoot, the memory of cool beer lingering on your tongue. In a world without electricity, this was luxury. Cooling without ice, chill without chillers, just enough drop in temperature to take the edge off the heat and make the day's brew feel worth it. Not just hydration, not just sustenance, but comfort, culture. You duck into another shadowed courtyard on your way, passing by 3 women using flat fans to stir air around their pots. They chat softly about recipes, about husbands, about a cousin who claims she made a beer so cold it frosted. Everyone laughs. No one believes her. You finally return to the brewery. The priestess waves you over again, offering one last taste. This one's been sitting under damp linen, near the cooling wall. It's the best yet. You raise the cup, nod in gratitude, and drink, cool, smooth, and utterly ancient. You sit back against the cool brick, the night wind begins to stir. Stars peek out over the rooftops. And somewhere nearby, another batch of beer begins to bubble. The sun has slipped behind the rooftops now, casting long shadows across the ziggurat skyline. But your journey's far from over. As twilight rolls in, you wander toward the river, the mighty Euphrates, lifeline of Sumer, whispering its slow secrets through the reeds. You reach a small dock just as a merchant's raft unloads its cargo, dried figs, wool, and several squat, mud-caked beer jars. One of the boatmen, sun-dark and barefoot, nods toward the jars with something like pride. "Cooler in water," he says, pointing down at the gently rippling river. And there it is, the next Sumerian trick for keeping beer cool: submersion. In a world without thermometers, this method was as close as they got to refrigeration. By keeping jars submerged or half submerged in the cool, flowing river, Sumerians could maintain a stable, reduced temperature, especially useful during scorching midday heat. The deeper the jar sat, the cooler the beer inside. The taste? Still grainy, still herbal, but smoother, more mellow. You step onto the boat where two men work by lantern light. One stirs a pot of lentils. The other pulls a jar from a woven sling in the water and hands you a cup. It's surprisingly decent, clean tasting, just cold enough to feel intentional. You close your eyes for a moment. The boat rocks gently, and the cool beer tastes like dusk. Mainstream historical fact time. The Sumerians built intricate irrigation systems, not just for crops, but for industry. These canals doubled as primitive refrigerators for breweries near the riverbanks. Strategic placement of cellars and jar platforms along water channels allowed brewers to harness ambient coolness. One of the boatmen gestures toward a riverside warehouse, half sunk into the earth. You follow him there, stepping inside a space that smells like earth and barley husks. Rows of jars sit on raised stone platforms, surrounded by moist mud floors that hold in the chill from the waterlogged earth beneath. It's not air-conditioned, but it's cool enough to preserve beer, grain, and the occasional jar of pickled fish. Priorities. You reach out and rest a hand on one jar. Damp, coldish. The beer inside is likely one of the better batches, reserved for traders, visiting dignitaries, or temple festivals. The boatman picks up a scrap of reed scroll, half crumpled and sealed with clay. Order, he grunts. Temple of Inanna. Even the love goddess gets her beer delivered cold. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some Sumerian brewers believed that beer kept cool by river water gained moon energy at night, especially if submerged under a full moon. It was said to produce more vivid dreams or deeper sleep, depending on the dosage. Was it mysticism? Marketing? Maybe both. The line between religion and product labeling was wonderfully blurry back then. You walk along the dock as the stars emerge, reflected in the slow silver of the river. Lanterns bob on nearby boats. Somewhere upriver, a flute plays, low and warbling. A dog barks at the sound and then seems to forget why. A woman nearby washes a pot with river mud and palm fibers, humming a familiar brewing hymn under her breath. As you meander back into town, you pass small homes with jars tucked into shady corners, pots wrapped in damp cloth, and teenagers bickering about whose father makes colder beer. It's universal. Even 4,000 years ago, dads competed over drinks. One household has a clever contraption, a jar surrounded by a ring of polished stones that retain nighttime coolness. Every morning they pour fresh water over the stones, which trickles down and evaporates slowly, cooling the air around the jar. You squat next to it and breathe in. Refreshing, like the desert exhaling. A young boy proudly explains how his uncle swears this method works better than those lazy river jars. He gestures with a stick. Stones are smarter than mud. You nod solemnly. It's a solid argument, and his confidence is unshakable. As the night deepens, the city softens. Markets close, but taverns light up. You pass a small one with a wide opening and clay lamps hung from string. Inside, workers sit cross-legged, sharing a giant beer pot, laughing between slurps. A man toasts to cool jars and hot nights, and everyone cheers like it's a proverb. Maybe it is. You settle at a nearby table. A jug is passed your way. This batch has been cooled in the shaded temple well, where the temperature hovers lower thanks to depth and damp stone. It's earthy and calming, like liquid dusk. You sip slowly, allowing the cool to wrap around your tongue. Historians still debate whether Sumerians truly preferred their beer chilled or whether the cooling efforts were more about preservation. But given how widespread these techniques were, from temple wells to riverside jars, it's safe to say they weren't just improvising. They were innovating, quietly, sleepily. And you, friend, are beginning to feel it, that slow drift downward, the warmth of the day slipping off your shoulders, replaced by river-cooled air, flickering lamp shadows, and the gentle rumble of a city falling asleep. You rise one more time and wander back toward the temple quarter. The priestess is gone, but the jars still sweat under linen wraps. The courtyard is quiet now. Just you, the stars, and the cool, faintly fizzy breath of a brew that started as barley and became, through art, chant, sweat, and clay, something sacred. You sit on a worn mat, rest your head against the wall, and listen to the last few bubbles rise in a jar nearby. Morning slips in gently, like a shy guest entering the room sideways. You wake not to the jarring sound of an alarm clock, but to the soft sweep of a broom across clay tiles and the low murmur of a reed flute outside. The brewery is coming back to life, and so are you, still nestled in a quiet corner, the taste of last night's river-chilled brew barely lingering on your tongue. The smell of damp earth and faintly sweet mash drifts past. The courtyard is bathed in slanted gold light, and somewhere beyond the walls a donkey is either singing or complaining. You're too sleepy to tell. Someone places a warm cloth near your hands. It's not for cleaning, it's comfort. And in this moment, you understand that comfort is the true currency of the Sumerian world. Today, you're curious about something else entirely, the ritual of drinking. Sure, you've sipped and slurped with brewers and priests, but now it's time to learn how a regular Sumerian drinks beer, not in temples or riverside parties, but in the daily grind of the dusty city. You step out and make your way toward the craftsman's quarter. Cobblers, potters, scribes, they're all starting their day. And most of them, they're already drinking, not to party, but as part of breakfast, or in some cases, instead of breakfast. You see a group of masons crouched around a pot, long reed straws sticking out like spokes of a wheel. They talk, argue, laugh, occasionally pausing to lean in and draw a deep, deliberate sip. This is communal drinking in its purest form. Nobody hogs the pot. Nobody gets a private cup. The beer is for the group, and the ritual itself is half the reason. Mainstream fact: Sumerians commonly drank beer this way, kneeling around shared jars with long, flexible straws, often made of hollow reeds. It wasn't just hygienic, relatively. It was social. It created conversation, encouraged equality. Even kings drank like this when they weren't throwing formal feasts. You're invited to join. You kneel. The clay floor is warm beneath your knees. The jar between you smells familiar now: barley, yeast, and faint river breeze. You draw a sip through the reed. It's decent, room temperature, a little nutty. You nod appreciatively, and the others nod back, as if you've passed some kind of unspoken test. Sumerian etiquette, it turns out, is mostly about balance. You don't slurp loudly. You don't hog the straw. You certainly don't swish and spit like a wine snob. You just sip, listen, share, repeat. The conversations around you drift from brick quality to temple rumors to whether the moon looked slightly annoyed last night. Quirky detail incoming. Some jars had built-in straw slots, carefully placed so that each drinker had their own angle. Archaeologists have even uncovered decorative pots with animal-shaped straw nozzles. Cats, goats, even lizards. Imagine sipping from the tail of a clay crocodile while gossiping about barley prices. Peak ancient chill. As the sun climbs, you wander farther into the poorer edges of town. Here, the beer is coarser, the mash less filtered. But the people, no less enthusiastic. You see young boys practicing with mini straws, learning how to avoid sucking up the sediment, a rite of passage, like learning to ride a bike, only fizzier. You sit at a corner shop, a literal hole in the wall with a shade cloth and two grumpy ducks lurking nearby. An older woman serves beer from a pot buried halfway in the ground. It's cooled by the night-chilled earth. She taps the side of the jar and smiles. "Still sleeping," she says. You laugh. So does the beer. It bubbles softly as it's ladled into your cup. Now here's the scholarly debate of the day. Was beer ever consumed alone in Sumer? Some historians argue that solitary drinking was rare, maybe even frowned upon. Others think it happened often, especially among workers or the ill. But written records lean heavily on group consumption. Songs, tablets, even graffiti reinforce the idea of beer as a social glue. Your cup runs low. The woman refills it without asking. You nod, but she doesn't smile this time, just points to a chunk of date cake on the side. "So wins. Eat," she says, Beer's lazy without food. That might be the most profound thing you've heard all day. As you nibble the date cake, dense, sticky, deeply sweet, you notice the ducks eyeing you hungrily. One quacks, offended, as if he expected to be offered some. You apologize. He doesn't forgive. You finish your drink and make your way back toward the market. Now the city is fully awake. Stalls open. Chatter rises. Beer pots appear everywhere, on carts, in alley nooks, at the feet of scribes, and at the elbows of farmers. One group of merchants has built a clever straw manifold, one giant pot, six straws, and a ceramic divider that funnels each draw to its own channel. It's both over-engineered and delightful. They sip with quiet satisfaction, nodding to you in passing. You step into the shadow of a tall wall for a break. The ground's warm, the jar beside you cooler, your belly full of ancient breakfast. You breathe deeply. The air smells of clay and grain. Somewhere a dog chases a chicken. Somewhere else, someone recites part of the hymn to Ninkasi, off-key but confident. You sip the last bit of beer from your cup and think, there's something beautifully human about this. Sharing a cool drink on a hot day. Laughing between sips. Accepting the fizz, the foam, and the faint sour notes of a life lived close to the earth. And as the sun reaches its zenith, you lean your head back against the wall and let your eyes close. Just for a moment. Just enough to drift. You wake to the sound of a stylus scratching gently on clay. Not paper. Clay. And not a pen either. It's a thin reed stylus making crisp impressions in a moist tablet that's balanced carefully on a wooden slab. The scribe sits cross-legged under a slanted awning, hunched over the task like he's translating divine secrets. Which in a way, he is. You stretch, dust clinging to your back, and shuffle closer. The man glances at you, raises a brow, then gestures for you to sit. You do. And just like that, you're in the world of Sumerian record-keeping, where beer, surprisingly or not, makes frequent appearances. This isn't poetry or law or epic literature. This is accounting, hard numbers, precise tallies. And the subject matter? Beer rations, beer shipments, beer wages, and possibly the scribe's own beer intake based on the wobbly line forming at the edge of his current entry. Mainstream fact of the moment. Beer in ancient Sumer wasn't just food or fun, it was currency. Workers were paid in beer. Priests received it as a stipend. Even the lowest laborers could expect a daily ration, carefully recorded and tightly monitored. Scribes like this one were the payroll department of a barley-powered society. The tablet he's working on shows symbols you almost recognize. Little wedge-shaped imprints that mean man, barley, jar, day. One line denotes a ration, 2 measures per day for a bricklayer, 4 for a temple guard. Apparently guarding gods is thirsty work. You lean in to observe, and he offers you a stylus. You try a few clumsy strokes in the corner of a broken tablet. It's harder than it looks. Precise pressure, angle, rhythm. You accidentally invent a new character, probably meaning confused tourist. Your scribe friend chuckles. He pulls out a jug of beer, lukewarm, slightly fizzy, flecked with sediment. He pours it into a chipped clay cup and hands it to you. For study, he says. You sip. It's statistically acceptable. Then he shows you something unusual, a beer ledger from the Temple Brewery. Dozens of entries in neat rows showing how many jars went to which priests, workers, guards, and even dancers. It's bureaucratic. Yes, but there's something warm about it, like a family recipe card in spreadsheet form. Here's your quirky bit. Some of these ancient records weren't just administrative. They included doodles. Tiny sketches in the margins. A grumpy goat, a crooked temple, a pot with wings. Historians aren't sure whether they were jokes, signatures, or distractions from long days in the scribe's chair. But they're undeniably human. One particularly worn tablet shows a shipment record to a neighboring village. 20 jars of beer, carried by donkey, stamped by a temple overseer. But there's an odd mark at the end, a thumbprint pressed deep into the clay. A signature? A final approval? Or just someone checking the texture before it dried? You ask the scribe, and he just shrugs. Maybe all, he says, smiling. As you sit watching him work, the sounds of the street rise behind you. Merchants hawking, kids shouting, sandals slapping dusty bricks. The hum of the living city, powered partly by beer and entirely by people with too much to do and not enough cool jars. Suddenly a delivery man arrives, young, sweating, carrying a wrapped jar in both arms. He drops it with a grunt beside the scribe and exhales like he's run a mile. Special batch, he mutters, wiping his forehead, temple coated. The scribe nods, makes a note, and pulls back the cloth. The jar is beautiful, tall, narrow, coated in painted symbols. It's cool to the touch, not chilled but not hot either. This one, you can tell, has been kept with care. Only for record, the scribe says, not drinking yet. He smirks. Historians still debate how centralized beer production was. Some argue it was tightly controlled by temple officials and administrators like this guy here. Others believe the state mainly tracked it to secure taxes and let private brewing flourish elsewhere. Whatever the truth, Sumer's beer economy was vast and deeply bureaucratic. Even the vessels were standardized. Some jars bore official seals, baked into the clay, proving authenticity and volume, like ancient barcodes. A few had braided rope handles so they could be hung from carts or yaks or ceilings. Efficient, practical, oddly elegant. You glance back at the scribble you made on the broken tablet and try not to laugh. It looks more like a scared frog than anything cuneiform. The scribe leans over, studies it, and draws two dots above it. Now it looks like a frog with a hat. He nods, satisfied. You've made your mark. As the day stretches forward, the light grows warmer, softer. The scribe begins stacking dried tablets into a clay box, sealing it with a plug of mud. Tomorrow, someone will carry it to the archive, or maybe lose it in a canal. Either way, it's history, etched in mud, cooled by water, delivered with barley breath and a chuckle. Before you leave, he points to a jar at the corner of his workspace. It's been wrapped in damp cloth, shaded by a tilted awning. You touch it. It's nice. Maybe 5 degrees cooler than the air. He taps it proudly. Good day for writing, he says. You nod. It is, and a better day for drinking. You're back on the move, walking slowly through the quieter quarters of the city now. The air is warmer than it should be, and the clay walls around you seem to absorb and radiate heat like contented cats. You've had enough beer to feel mellow, not enough to feel philosophical, but just the right amount to appreciate shade. You duck into a side alley following the scent of fermentation and something faintly herbal. Another brewery, this one tucked between a dye workshop and a courtyard bakery. You recognize the familiar hiss of fermentation, the clatter of ceramic lids, the chant of two women arguing about temperature with the passion of poets. But this brewery is doing something a bit different. They're cooling beer using earth and shadow, not water. It's a trick you have heard about, but seeing it in action is, well, surprisingly technical for 4,000 years ago. You're led into a sunken courtyard, an open-air pit about 3 feet below street level. Clay jars rest in the shade of the walls, arranged carefully to avoid direct sunlight. Damp sand surrounds the base of each vessel. Every few minutes, someone comes by to sprinkle water across the ground. The water evaporates slowly, drawing heat away with it, cooling the jars in turn. It's a passive system. No wind, no river, just earth, heat, and patience. Your mainstream historical fact here. This technique, known today as evaporative cooling, was widely used in ancient Mesopotamia. Homes had wind towers. Storage rooms were half buried. Beer jars, they were carefully positioned for maximum shade and airflow, all without a single fan or plug. One brewer offers you a jar to inspect. You kneel. The vessel is rough to the touch, a simple gray with mineral streaks. You pick it up. It's not heavy, but the base is cold. Real cold. Not ice bucket cold, but several degrees cooler than the air around you. You press your cheek to it. Yep, this is the real deal. She grins, proud. We call it night pot, she says. Cold like the moon. And here comes your fringe detail. Some Sumerians believed that pots cooled better when aligned with certain stars. They'd orient storage pits toward constellations, hoping the spirits of the sky would bless their brew. Was it astronomy? Astrology? Airflow? No one knows. But if your beer was cold and the stars looked pleased, Who were you to argue? You sit in the pit with them for a while. The walls block the wind. The sounds of the city are muffled. You hear the scratch of sandals overhead, the cluck of a chicken, and the far-off call of someone selling dried fish. In the stillness, the bubbling of the jars is almost musical. One of the brewers places a cool cloth over your shoulders. Hot brains, she says with a grin. Cool beer fixes. You ask about storage. Only one day, she explains. Then it goes bitter, which leads to a fascinating discovery. Sumerian beer didn't keep. No preservatives, no bottles, no refrigeration. You brewed it, you drank it, you started over every day. So how did they deal with surplus? Answer, they didn't. They traded, or they poured the rest into earth pits, letting it sour into a kind of proto-vinegar used for pickling or cleaning. Historians still argue whether Sumerians intentionally made sour beer for specific rituals or whether it was just an accepted reality. Some texts mention tart beer, but that might have just been a bad batch nobody wanted to throw away. The brewer pulls up a clay lid and offers you a sip. It's a cooler batch, grainy as always, but shockingly smooth. You feel it chill your teeth slightly. This is what they were going for. You close your eyes and lean back against the pit wall, the cool earth, the low murmur of brewing, the faint scent of soaked reeds. It's like the ancient version of a spa day. Only instead of cucumber water, you're sipping porridge beer under a cloth awning. Later, you follow them into the storage room. It's dark, with a low ceiling and earthen shelves stacked with beer pots marked in ink and etched symbols. A central drain channels water into a basin, where several jars sit in half submersion. And there's a twist. These jars are double-walled. You've seen the design before, but didn't connect the dots. An inner chamber for beer, an outer one filled with water. As the water evaporates from the porous clay shell, it cools the beer inside. Thermodynamics 101, Sumerian edition. You peer into one. The brewer offers you a sip. This one's cooler still, maybe 18 degrees, maybe less. It tastes different, more refreshing, like someone whispered modern craft into the past. The pot has a name painted on its side, Mala Ninkasi. Gift to Ninkasi, she explains. First drink always goes to her. You think back to your first sip this morning. Warm, nutty, dusty. This right here is its elegant, evolved cousin. Cool, thoughtful, timed. You give a little nod to the clay ceiling in case Ninkasi is watching. As the shadows stretch, you exit the brewery and step back into the golden wash of evening light. The air is warmer out here, the kind that clings to skin and whispers of another long night ahead. But your belly is calm, your breath is slow, and your tongue still holds the echo of cold beer brewed under the stars. You step back into the flow of the city, now bathed in the amber haze of late afternoon. The streets are softer, slower. Merchants stretch in the doorways of their stalls. A boy naps with his head on a basket of onions. You pass a temple drummer playing a beat that's less ceremony and more siesta. The air smells like baked earth and simmering lentils. But there's something else too. Barley. Always barley. You follow the scent, weaving past crates of dried dates and wheels of salty cheese, until you arrive at a shaded courtyard bustling with movement. It's not a brewery. Ishibao. It's something more official, more organized. Scribes, runners, guards. You realize where you are, the logistics heart of the beer economy. Because in Sumer, beer wasn't just food, fun, or even currency. It was infrastructure. A ledger is nailed to the wall, a broad clay tablet scratched deep with cuneiform. A nearby scribe reads aloud from a second copy, his voice dry and rhythmic. 3 jars to Temple of Ishtar, 2 to Eastgate Guards, 7 to the Priestess Caravan. Here's your mainstream fact. Beer was one of the primary ways the state paid its people. Laborers who built canals, beer. Soldiers who guarded storehouses, beer. Priests who performed daily rituals, also beer, sometimes the fancy kind. It was sustenance and salary all in one. You watch as a delivery crew loads up a cart, jars wrapped in linen, balanced carefully on straw. One man makes a small chalk mark beside each one, a primitive quality control. Another man carries a tall rod, not for walking, but for measuring. Height of jars, number per load, distance to drop off. You're witnessing the world's earliest supply chain. Your guide appears again, a brewer from earlier in the temple. She grins. You thought we just stirred and chanted? Nope. They planned, scheduled, inventoried. Sumerians took their beer management more seriously than some modern governments take water. Every drop accounted for, every worker tracked, and heaven help the scribe who miscounts a shipment. That goat doodle won't save you this time. She takes you to a back courtyard. Quiet, calm. Here, jars sit half submerged in sand trenches. A few have been marked with painted seals, swirls, zigzags, even one shaped like a fish. These are the wage jars, she explains. Every worker got their daily ration from one of these. Some took theirs warm, straight from the top. Others requested theirs from the bottom, where it was slightly cooler. Some liked the foam, others avoided it. Quirky detail incoming. One job title carved on a real cuneiform tablet, Beer Disbursement Overseer. That's right, an entire profession dedicated to making sure people got their beer on time and without cheating. Imagine the complaints, he took a double slurp, or this jar's been in the sun too long. Historians still argue whether these rations varied based on skill or status. Some evidence suggests yes, priests and scribes got sweeter, colder, better beer. Laborers got thicker, warmer, grainier brews, but others say it was more about proximity. Closer to the temple, better beer. Farther out, enjoy the crusty end. The sun begins to dip. You follow a small procession of workers collecting their daily rations. No lines, no shouting, just a quiet routine. Each one steps up, takes their share, murmurs a word of thanks to the guaz, to the brewer, to the jar, who knows, and steps away. You do the same. Your jar is marked with a crescent, temple allocation. The brew is cooler than expected, even at this hour. You take a sip, smooth, slightly nutty. You sigh, long and low. A man beside you chuckles. That's the don't have to think anymore batch, he says. You glance at his jar. It's got a squiggly line, meaning unknown. You ask him what it means. He shrugs. Means mine's better. Across the courtyard, a boy pulls a small cart full of empty jars. He whistles a simple tune. A woman follows behind, sprinkling water over the sand to keep the trench moist and the cooling system working overnight. The brewer points toward the cart. That's the secret, she says. Not the clay, not the chant. It's the routine. And that hits you. The whole city runs on rhythm of water wheels, chants, ledgers, and sips. Beer isn't just a beverage here. It's a tempo, a beat that paces the day, marks the work, softens the edges of life under a burning sun. You walk slowly now, each step echoing that rhythm. Your jar clinks softly at your side. Around you, the city moves like a heartbeat. Slow, strong, steady. You pass an old man asleep under a palm awning, a half-empty cup in his lap. You nod respectfully. He's living the dream, or at least dreaming in beer, and somewhere far off, another batch begins to bubble. The moon hangs high now, a pale coin pressed into the velvet sky. Sumer has slowed to a hush. The children have stopped chasing goats. The scribes have sealed their tablets. And most importantly, the beer has cooled. You wander down toward the artisan's quarter, led by laughter, music, and the clink of ceramic on stone. This isn't temple drinking. This is after hours. This is where the day exhales. You slip into a courtyard with low benches and wide, shallow jars nested in sand. A group of women lounge beneath woven canopies, passing around a communal vessel with reed straws poking out like the spines of a sleepy porcupine. You're waved in, no questions asked. You kneel, you sip. The beer is faintly sweet, mellow, cooled just enough to feel intentional. It's been resting in sand dampened from an earlier flood bucket run. Your mainstream fact for this section. Sumerians often exploited nighttime evaporation in desert climates to lower temperatures. They stored beer in shallow pits or wrapped jars in soaked linen. A small breeze? That was just divine assistance. The talk tonight isn't business or barley yields. It's gossip. One woman teases another for sneaking out with the baker's son. Another complains that her husband drinks too much of the cold beer and leaves her the foamy bits. It's light, playful, and earthy, just like the drink. Then the conversation turns to the weirdly scientific. One woman swears that painting jars black helps them stay cooler. Another insists white jars are better for deflecting sun heat. A third waves her hand and says, "It's not color, it's the sand." They debate, laugh, sip. Historians still argue the same thing. Some say black jars absorb night chill better. Others claim lighter shades help bounce the heat. The truth? Probably both. Or neither. But the beer keeps cooling. A young boy appears with a fresh batch. He's sweaty, dusty, proud. "River batch," he declares, setting the jar down like a holy artifact. It's still damp. You all lean in. One woman whispers, "You first, stranger." You sip. "Oh, this one's different, colder, cleaner." There's a tiny fizz at the top, like the beer is chuckling. It tastes of roasted grain and river wind, with just a hint of fig. The group watches your face. You nod, slow and serious. They cheer. The boy grins like he's won a race. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some Sumerian brewers tied tiny bells to the necks of their fermentation jars. Not for sound, but to measure temperature by feel. If the jar sweated, the bell cooled. If the bell stayed warm, too much sun. Over time, they learned the subtle cues. Who needs thermometers when you've got bells in hands? The conversation shifts again. This time, dreams. One woman swears she dreamt of Ninkasi, cloaked in barley and mist, whispering secret brewing spells. Another insists her dreams are always better after cold beer. "Hot beer dreams are angry," she says. "Cold beer dreams are long." You think about that, the way coolness softens the edges of things, the way it calms the mind, makes you slow down, makes the clay under your palms feel like velvet, makes the sky look deeper. A woman passes you a bowl of pickled onions. You pop one in your mouth. Sour, sharp, perfect with beer. Another passes a slice of barley cake. It's dry. It crumbles. It balances the tang. One woman pulls out a bone flute and begins to play. The notes wander lazily like tipsy birds. A man taps a rhythm on a jar. You close your eyes for a moment. You could be anywhere or anywhen. Because this moment, it could have happened 4,000 years ago or 4 hours ago. Same laughter, same slosh of brew, same cool against warm skin. You open your eyes. One of the women is telling a story now about a brewer who once kept beer cold in the desert by building a trench and sleeping beside it all night to scare away sand spirits. Did it work? Nobody knows. But the beer stayed cold, and that's what matters. You look around and realize everyone here, old, young, priestess, craftsman, they all gather for this. Not just for drink, but for ease, for letting go, for that deep breath of stillness that cold beer brings after a hot day. You glance up at the moon. It seems closer tonight. Or maybe you're just grounded. Either way, you sip again, and time slips a little. By now, you've become something of a background character in Sumer, drifting from courtyard to courtyard, occasionally helping shift a jar, usually in exchange for a sip. You're not from here, not really, but people greet you with nods. The beer softens you into the scene. Tonight, you're drawn toward a side alley behind the metalworkers' stalls. A rhythmic beat echoes off the walls. Tap, 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 like someone playing a drum with their knuckles. You turn the corner and find a cooling alcove unlike any you've seen so far. It's narrow, carved into the side of a workshop, with polished stones lining the base and 3 large jars wrapped in animal bladder sheets, tightly stretched and tied with sinew cords. A woman crouches nearby, pressing her palm to each one like a doctor checking for fever. You ask. She answers simply, "Bladder breathes, like skin, good for chill." That's your quirky tidbit. Some Sumerians, ever experimental, use stretched animal membranes, especially goat or sheep bladders, as cooling wraps. Soaked and wrapped tightly around beer jars, they held in moisture and encouraged slow evaporation. It wasn't common, but it worked, and it made your drink taste slightly wild. You're handed a sip from one such jar. The beer is tangy, with a hint of iron and a chill that surprises your molars. You make a face. Everyone laughs. The woman stirs a basin of thick clay slip, adding ash and crushed reeds. New jars, she says. Better pours. She's testing clay formulas to improve cooling performance, unofficially inventing thermal engineering 4,000 years early. Mainstream historical fact: Mesopotamians experimented with different clay compositions for varying levels of porosity. Some pots were designed to leak slightly, just enough to sweat but not crack. Others were burnished smooth to slow down cooling for long-term storage. Function dictated form. You run your hand along one jar's side. It's slightly textured, intentionally so. Small grooves hold extra moisture, increasing surface area, enhancing evaporation. Not an accident, a design. These brewers weren't guessing. They were tweaking variables, recording results, adapting. You step back as a man pushes in a cart of fresh barley loaves. The bread is hard, almost stone-like, stacked neatly in cloth. These will be crushed into mash tomorrow. A fresh batch, a fresh chance to chase the cool. The woman pats a jar and says, "This one, Temple Feast." You raise a brow. She smirks. Coldest one, always the coldest. She leads you through the rear of the workshop and into a shaded passage where 4 young apprentices sit cross-legged, carving symbols into new jars with bone tools. One is etching a crescent moon. Another, a fish with 7 lines through it. Branding, perhaps, or superstition, or both. Historians still debate whether these markings were purely identifiers or part of some magical thinking, a way to invite good luck or keep the beer from going sour. Some jars even had miniature prayers written along the rim. Stay cold, be clear, don't betray. The coolness in the air here isn't magic, it's technique. The stone floors soak up night air. The walls are treated with mud plaster mixed with something. Minty, you ask. The brewer smiles. Crushed herbs, scares flies, smells cold. It does. A worker arrives with a cracked jar. The brewer frowns, taps it. Too much fire. She explains that kiln timing affected porosity. A hotter, longer bake, tighter clay, less cooling. A quick, low fire, more porous, better sweat, but shorter lifespan. The balance is delicate. Too porous and your beer leaks. Too tight and it overheats. Every jar is a calculated risk. A roll of the fermented dice. You sit beside one still wrapped in soaked linen. It drips slowly into a shallow tray filled with black sand. The air above it is noticeably cooler. You rest your face close. It's like leaning into the breath of a clay ghost. They give you a reed mat and a small cup. This one's been chilling all day. Aged barley mash, lightly sweetened, cooled in the shadows of science and stubborn tradition. You sip, and it hums. Not literally, but somewhere deep in your bones, the taste resonates. This isn't just beer. It's persistence. It's an entire civilization refusing to sweat more than necessary. The apprentices begin to hum a work song, slow, rhythmic. You don't know the words, but you get the meaning. Cooler jars, better nights. As you stretch your legs and lean back against the wall, the night deepens. Someone lights a lamp with a flame so small it barely flickers. The clay beneath you holds onto the day's chill, and your thoughts blur, past goat bladders, lunar alignments, and heat equations disguised as prayers. You think, maybe they didn't invent refrigeration, but they understood the stakes, and they made it work. You wake again, if you ever truly slept, to a city suspended in half-light. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but it's close. The sky is bruised lavender, and the coolest part of the Sumerian day has arrived. It's the hour when pots sweat the most, when river mist creeps between alleys, and when brewers stretch their backs and whisper, "It's a good batch day." You follow your instincts in the scent of warm date mash toward the feasting quarter, where the more elaborate beer rituals unfold. This isn't about wages or routine, this is about celebration. A wide courtyard awaits, lined with woven mats and polished reed stools. Clay lamps flicker, and the walls shimmer with painted murals, scenes of feasts, processions, and beer-drinking gods. At the center stands a massive feast jar, nearly as tall as a man, wrapped in damp linen and shaded by palm leaves. A woman stands beside it, arms crossed, watching the air for temperature shifts like a hawk tracks wind. Not ready, she mutters. You nod and wait. Your mainstream historical fact here. Ceremonial beer was made from richer barley, often double fermented, sometimes with added fruit or spices. It wasn't for everyday sipping. It was special. The coldest, clearest, and most refined batch was reserved for offerings, festivals, and honored guests. You, by some cosmic fluke of presence and patience, are one of them today. While the beer rests, preparations unfold around you. Young workers lay out dishes of honey-roasted chickpeas, fig slices, and a type of spiced flatbread so fragrant you nearly forget about the beer. A trio of musicians tunes reed flutes and plucked string lyres. The rhythm is loose, drifting, like the kind of music that assumes the drink has already kicked in. Now comes the quirky bit. The priestess overseeing the beer begins chanting, not a hymn, but a temperature chant. It's half song, half superstition. Cool as the well, deep as the moon, sweet as the barley's breath. Over and over. A lullaby for a jar. You're told this was common practice in high ceremonies. Brewers would chant or hum while checking jars. Some claim the right frequencies help settle the foam. Others just liked the sound. Historians still argue whether this was ritualized science or scientific ritual. Either way, you won't find a Sumerian brewmaster whispering to hot beer. The chant is for the cool. Finally, the priestess stops. She nods. The feast jar is ready. A row of cups is laid out, thin-walled, slightly flared at the rim. Not your average reed sipper. These are for dignified consumption. Or at least the ceremonial first few sips before things inevitably devolve into shouting about whose goat is prettier. You're handed one. It's cool to the touch. And heavy. The beer inside is darker than usual, almost bronze in the lamplight. A few bubbles dance across the surface, then vanish like shy ghosts. You sip. It's smooth. No grit. Just a faint sweetness. A whisper of fig. And a coolness that seems to pause time. Someone exhales nearby like they've been holding their breath all week. Another mutters, best since last flood. The feast begins slowly. The food is passed in wide bowls. The music stirs and sways. You watch faces soften, jaws unclench, shoulders sink. The beer isn't cold by modern standards, but by Sumerian ones, it's a miracle. Every sip is a little reward for enduring sun, dust, labor, and the great unknowns. You catch a conversation about dreams again. One woman says she dreamt of Ninkasi blessing her with a jar that never emptied. Another says she once drank cold beer under a full moon and saw a white wolf nod at her approvingly. No one doubts either story. Now here's a detail scholars still puzzle over. At these feasts, it wasn't uncommon to bury the first jar after drinking, returning it to the earth, to cool forever. Symbolic? Probably. Magical? To them, absolutely. It was a sign of gratitude, a closing of the loop, brewed from earth, cooled by earth, returned to earth. You watch as the priestess pours the last dregs of the feast jar into a smaller vessel and steps toward a pit near the wall. A hush falls. She kneels. She pours. And for a moment, everyone listens, not to her words, but to the sound of liquid hitting soil. Then the music resumes. The feast doesn't get rowdy exactly, but it loosens. People talk faster, laugh longer. Someone gets up and dances. Someone else starts an off-key song. Someone's goat wanders into the courtyard and is lovingly shooed away. You lean back, cup in hand, the last sip still cool despite the rising heat. You've had dozens of beers now in different corners of the city. But this is the experience. Chilled not by ice, but by thousands of years of trial, observation, ritual, and care. You look around, it's not a high-tech civilization, but it's deep. It knows the value of comfort, of slowness, of clay and shadow and herbs and cloth, of sharing a cool drink after a long day in the sun. And you're not just watching anymore. You're part of the brew. The feast winds down slowly, like a river slipping back into its banks after a brief, joyful flood. Laughter softens into murmurs. The musicians pluck their final notes and stretch their tired fingers. Even the goats, finally banished from the courtyard, have stopped trying to crash the party. You're lying on a woven mat now, belly full, mind warm, breath slow. The cup in your hand is empty, but the cool of it lingers like a fading dream. Someone drapes a cloth over your legs. You smile without opening your eyes. The air has cooled just enough to be kind. But your journey isn't quite over yet. A hand nudges your shoulder gently. A young man, dressed in apprentice robes, gestures for you to follow him. You rise slowly, joints crackling like sun-dried clay, and trail him through the quieter back streets. He doesn't speak, but the destination speaks for itself. A narrow stairwell leading down, carved into the earth. You descend. Cool air meets your face halfway. Not a breeze, more like a breath. And then you're in it, the deep cellars. These aren't showy. No murals, no chanting, no goat distractions. Just engineering. Brick walls reinforced with reed mesh. Floors dampened just enough. Jars arranged with obsessive precision. Some half buried in sand, others stacked on clay pedestals that funnel away heat like ancient heat sinks. The man leads you to a special alcove. One jar, shorter, thicker, wrapped tightly in what looks like woven wool dipped in some dark, tacky resin. He places a hand on it reverently. "The coldest," he whispers. You kneel. You touch it. It's the closest thing to cold you've felt all week. It's shocking. Not ice cold, not modern fridge cold, but cave cold. Night breeze on stone cold. You look at him, eyebrows raised. He grins. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamians, particularly in temple complexes and palaces, built subterranean storage pits and cellars to house not just beer, but dates, dried fish, grain, and oils. Some of these pits extended over 6 feet deep, where the Earth's constant temperature provided a natural cooling environment. You're handed a ladle carved from bone. The apprentice opens the jar, and you swear the inside exhales. A slow puff of barley steam, cooled by time and shadow. He dips, pours. You raise the bowl to your lips. This beer tastes settled. Not lively, not fizzy, just smooth, clear, cool in the truest sense. There's a gravity to it, like drinking from the past with no need to filter. You sip, and the walls don't echo. They absorb. And here's your fringe detail. A few ancient Sumerian texts reference the lost chill, a phrase scholars still don't fully understand. Some think it referred to a brewing technique so precise it yielded beer near cold even in summer. Others believe it was metaphorical, an ideal of clarity, calm, and peace. A beer so perfect it silenced the room. You look around. This feels like that. The apprentice sits beside you. He's young, curious, probably hasn't left this city, but he asks what beer is like in your world. You tell him about lagers and stouts and cold taps and stainless steel, about bottles and cans and brands and bars. He listens, nods, but then shrugs. "But do you still sit like this?" he asks. "Still sip slow?" You pause, you think, you answer carefully. "Sometimes." He doesn't smile, but you see something settle in him, like understanding. He stands, wipes his hands on a cloth, and extinguishes the oil lamp behind you. You sit in the dark just long enough to feel the stillness stretch, to understand why they built the jar this way, why they buried it, why they waited. Because waiting was the final ingredient. You emerge from the cellar as the sky just begins to shift. The eastern clouds glow faintly pink. You smell the river. You hear a rooster. You see an old woman tipping water over her courtyard sand, prepping it for a fresh day of cooling. And suddenly it's all one thing. Temples, courtyards, clay, cellars, cooling, sipping, talking, waiting. Every cold sip was a tiny rebellion against the sun, a quiet refusal to rush, a declaration. We care enough to make this better. And that care, that slow, dusty, clever care, is everywhere now, in the sound of sandals brushing stone, in the sight of a reed door opening, in your breath as it fogs ever so slightly in the morning air. You stretch, you smile, and you walk. Your belly holds the last of that cool beer. But your bones? They carry the chill of 4,000 years. You wander without direction now, letting your feet trace the fading hush of Sumer's morning. The clay roads are streaked with early sun. A baker pulls the first loaves from his dome-shaped oven. A temple guard rubs sleep from his eyes, his shift ending just as yours begins. There's something sacred about this hour, when the city stirs but hasn't yet spoken. And here, amid the silence, you stumble across a courtyard of discarded things. Not trash, not quite. It's a potter's yard, shattered jars, cracked bowls, fragments of drinkware, decorated in glazes that once shimmered and now only dust. You step carefully through them, each shard a forgotten toast, a broken prayer. And in the middle of this archaeological mosaic stands a young woman holding the neck of a broken beer jar up to the sun, squinting through the clay curve like it's a telescope. This one, she says softly, was coldest last year. You're intrigued. You help her clean a few shards. She talks while she works, about her grandfather who swore the best beer was always made on odd-numbered days, about a cousin who tried to brew in a stone jar. It exploded. About the time lightning struck a cooling jar and nobody drank for a week out of fear. Beer's not just taste, she says, brushing clay dust from her palms. It's texture. Feel. Cool. She taps her temple. Drink cold, think clear. Historians still argue whether this kind of craftsmanship was widespread or specialized. Some believe every family had its own secret technique. Others think standardization dominated. But the ruins speak softly in favor of the tinkerers, the small adjustments, the quiet innovations, the potters and brewers who saw each jar not as tradition, but as potential. A boy runs into the yard cradling a fresh jug. New batch, he announces, holding it like a treasure. The woman grabs a stick, pokes the clay. Too hot, she mutters. Then she tucks it into a damp cloth and sets it in the shade, resting it against a cool stone slab. She winks. Check it again in an hour. You stay a while, chatting, stacking shards, listening to the chirp of waking birds and the first clanks of morning commerce. The city begins its work again. Barley sacks on shoulders, fish laid on reed mats, beer jars lined up along the canal for their daily dunk. And just when you think it's time to go, she hands you a shard. It's plain, no paint, no ribbing. First jar I made, she says. Didn't keep anything cold, but it poured nice. You thank her. You tuck the shard into your satchel, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder of imperfection, of effort, of all the beer that didn't quite make it, but tried. You step back onto the street. The sun's higher now. Heat already presses at your neck, but your feet are cool, your thoughts are clearer, and your hand still holding the edge of history. The day matures. Heat returns, not as a surprise now, but as a certainty, woven into every breeze, every clay brick, every bead of sweat. But you walk it differently now. You've earned a kind of immunity, not from the heat, no, but from its urgency. Because once you've known how to cool beer with shadow and time, the sun starts to feel less like a tyrant and more like a challenge. And so you wander back toward the river. The Euphrates rolls on, golden now, curling past the city like a silk ribbon. You spot a dockside tavern, barely more than a reed fence and a flat stone bench. A tired man waves you over. River beer, he says, pointing to a squat pot nestled in damp sand. It's your final taste. The last jar is unassuming. No symbols, no ribbing, just a humble vessel soaked from hours beside the water. You lift the cup, sip. The beer is almost tepid, but beneath the warmth, there's a whisper of cool. And that whisper is enough. You lean back, watching traders load jars onto barges. Each vessel carefully sealed with straw and wax, some marked with destination glyphs. Isen, Larsa, maybe even far off Akkad. These aren't just shipments, they're exports of ease, of know-how, of chilled comfort in a clay suit. Mainstream fact, one more for the road. Beer was among Mesopotamia's earliest traded goods. It didn't travel well, but recipes did. Techniques, jar styles, brewing hymns, even cooling tricks. There's evidence that Sumerian methods influenced later cultures. Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians. A lineage of refreshment carried jar by jar, chant by chant. A woman nearby is reciting something softly, a farewell toast, you realize, not a poem, just words passed down. To the jar that never broke, to the drink that never warmed, to the hand that poured in shade. You close your eyes, repeat the words in your head. They're not history, they're habit. Now for your final quirky gem. In one excavation, archaeologists uncovered a jar buried with a man, labeled simply for the long sleep. Inside, remnants of barley, date syrup, and mint. A personal brew, chilled underground for eternity. Sumerians, it seems, believed that the next life should also include a good beer, and preferably a cold one. And so here you are, you've walked the alleys, knees dusted from reed mats, lips stained faintly with foam, mind tinged with the gentle genius of a civilization that refused to accept heat as fate. You didn't just drink their beer, you drank their resilience, their rhythm, their patience. And as the wind picks up, a true breeze, not just a trick of the heat, you take your final sip. The man beside you grunts in satisfaction. The boat pulls away. The pot is empty. The jar still cool. You stand and walk slowly toward the sound of the ziggurat bell. The city waits, the sun rises, and the chill lingers. So now as you lie back in your bed or maybe still curled up on your couch with headphones in, let this city fade. Let Sumer soften into background hums of slow rivers and quieter thoughts. The streets are empty now. The last embers of the courtyard fires glow softly. The jars sit nestled in sand, each holding the day's final breath of cool. You can almost feel one beside you, its damp clay side resting against your fingers, its contents still slightly chilled from hours spent beneath wet linen and woven shade. The stars over Mesopotamia turn quietly. A breeze stirs the reed curtains. The air doesn't need to be cold anymore. You have carried the coolness inside you. Let it spread through your limbs, settle into your chest, smooth the furrow in your brow. You don't need to hold on to anything right now, not time, not heat, not the next thought. You've traveled thousands of years on your back, walked through dust and hymn and barley steam. And what did you find waiting at the end? A sip, a smile, a story so slow it cooled the air around it. So rest. Let the jar sit beside you. Empty maybe, but still cool. Because here in the long sleep, everything worth keeping stays close. Everything warm can wait. And the chill? The chill is yours now.